This is a recording for the CUPHAT project, Coastal Uplands, Heritage and Tourism. My name is Daniel Carey. Today is the 18th of July 2023 and I have with me here Anna Carr. Thank you, Anna. Can you confirm for the recorder that you're happy to take part in this project?
Yes, I am, Daniel.
Thanks. And can you spell your name for the recorder, please?
Yes, Annacarr.
Lovely. Can you start by telling me what your earliest or first memories of the Blackstairs region are?
That's a tricky question. I suppose growing up in Callan, there's probably a lot of memories of just my grandfather would have been very involved in, I suppose, development group as it is now in Callan. I'm not really sure it was as formal back then, but he would have been involved in developing the grotto there in the village. He'd have also had involvement in 1998 with the monument being erected and stuff like that. So I suppose there was always that was always going on. In my life, I lived on the same lane as my grandparents, so spent a lot of time with my grandfather. So a lot of the time going around in the car and he was doing things in Callan, so you were kind of always there, I suppose. And I suppose the mountains, probably my grandmother was where a lot of my knowledge from that would have came. She was a Kilteely woman, and she had a real affinity and fondness for the mountain. She always said she'd much rather be on the mountain on a warm day than at the beach, and she loved to go up the mountain. That was her thing, to go for a drive and go for a picnic. Up the mountain was just her big love. She had loads of stories about picking frockens. Frockens were a massive part of herself and her sisters' lives, their little escapades to pick frockens, and she had some good stories about my husband, John Brennan from Kilteely. His grandfather's land was quite close to my granny's land, and they would have been like on his land picking frockens and run off his land, or living in fear of being run off his land for picking the frockens. So even things like that, I suppose, are my memories of what I know about the mountain. Probably came from her, and probably around Callan came from my grandfather, I suppose. So that would be my earliest memories, really.
Yeah. Your family on both sides are kind of native to the area, or are you that?
When my mother is Davidstown, my granny and granddad are both. My father's parents, are both Callan and Kilteely. Yeah.
Okay. How would you describe the area to somebody who hasn't been here before?
I suppose quiet is something that always comes up. I know a lot of, say, my college friends or whatever come down, like they love just the peace and the solitude, I suppose, when you go out the door, when you go for a walk, that even if you're not going up as far as the mountain, but if you're just going up Raduff, maybe up towards Spring Mount, or even, over towards Alnafa or anywhere around here, it's just so quiet. You pass a couple of cars, maybe it'll pass you or whatever, few dogs, but that's it. It's the peace and quiet and the solitude of it, I suppose, that a lot of people would appreciate. And I suppose sometimes we forget, maybe, because we're living with it all the time. And sometimes I suppose you do forget. And I know myself, I would walk a good bit, and when I'm in work, I work in Wexford Town, I would go for a walk sometimes at lunchtime or whatever, and just the noise of the traffic and the cars and whatever, it's so much more pleasant to just to be around here. Yeah.
Do you have a favourite spot locally?
Not necessarily, I suppose. No, I suppose I vary it. I like everywhere, really. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about growing up in the area.
I suppose, as you know, Rathnewer would be very much like a GAA stronghold. So I'd have went to school in Rathnewer. The majority of us around Callan would have, and then some of the Church of Ireland community would have went to Killegny, and the school there has since closed. But I suppose we were everyone got on with everyone around Killaan. I think that was really important, and we, kind of, I suppose everyone was neighbours. We all mixed together. Everyone went to school on the bus from Killaan. Everyone was friends with everyone, and I suppose, my younger memories really would revolve around just kind of being in and out of neighbours' houses and things like that. We had neighbours at the end of our lane at home. The Doctors was there, and that's the original family that were there when I grew up still live there now. They moved back, but the Doctor is long since retired. But I suppose the fact that the Doctors was at the end of our lane was a bit of a big deal, because everyone knew where you lived, because you lived on the Doctor's lane, and there was always cars at the end of the lane, because people obviously were going to the doctors. And then there was always the drama, unfortunate for some obviously, when an ambulance would have to come, and there'd be all of that sort of stuff. So that was kind of a big part of our life, and we'd have been very friendly with the family. So there was one, they had a son in my class and a daughter in my brother's class. So we spent a lot of time with them, and they weren't allowed to play football or anything outside their house. Well, that's my memory of it anyway, because if they had a patient, because the patients would be coming in to the surgery, so they used to spend a lot of time at our house to do that kind of stuff. But then they had a colour television when we didn't, and more channels than us. So I have good memories of sitting in their front living room, getting to watch things on their television that we couldn't watch at home on our television.
So a mutually beneficial arrangement.
So growing up in Killaan, I suppose, it was I suppose very, very innocent, very different times to now. Like, even growing up, like, we wouldn't have had a phone in our house for a long time, and my two aunts lived up in my grandparents' house as well. And I remember when a phone call would come for either my parents, one of my aunts would run down the lane to tell my parents to go up that there was a phone call. So just things like that, when I tell my own kids now, like, they just think this is hysterical altogether, that you'd have been doing that. Like,
what other ways has the village changed, or has life changed since your own childhood?
I suppose the village has changed in ways in that there's more development with the new housing estate. A lot of the families are still the same families. There obviously are some new people in Killaan, but there's still very much a sense of, a lot of it is the historical families are still in the same places as they were. Records obviously would have played a massive part in the village. I suppose growing up, like, my grandfather would have told an awful lot of stories of his time. He'd been very good friends with the Records, particularly with Bobby. So he'd have talked a lot about, he would have worked there, and he'd have had kind of business deals, himself and Bobby together, a few things, stuff like that. So he'd have told an awful lot of stories. So you knew a lot about the goings on, I suppose, from him. And then I suppose when I was that little bit older, I suppose Records became more important as a teenager, because there was teenage discos, and then there was the pub and nightclub, obviously, as I got older, and I would have waitressed there for a good while in my teenage years as well. So I suppose the Records, I suppose, brought the community together. That's where you met a lot of people. And then in recent years, I suppose, for the last 11 years up until the last month or so, the loss of Records was probably the biggest talking point. And I suppose at various stages, when the Record family sold it, and then there were other owners, and then there was a bit of a decline, I suppose, at times. That was always a really topical issue in Killaan, which I suppose showed the importance of the pub and the business to the area.
It was kind of the hub of the sort of wider village community.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your school days, both primary and secondary?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, went to primary school in Rathnewer. I suppose, like, my memories of it was just, it was a great school. I loved school anyway. My aunt was teacher there. She taught me for 2 years. it was very much a community-based school, I suppose. Very big classes. There was 43, 44 at one stage in my class. And like when you think about that many kids in junior infants now, like how did the teacher manage with that many of us? But anyway, she did. And her own son was in the class as well. And the same with quite a few kids, like they had aunts teaching in the school and stuff. There was a very much sense of community, and the locality was very important. GA would have been very important in the school as well. Irish was very important. Irish would have been very strong in Rathnewer is my memory of it, because I know when I went to secondary school, myself and the other girls who came from Rathnewer were far better at Irish, and the teachers would have said it kind of in secondary school. The girls from Rathnewer always had strong Irish. We spent a lot of time on Irish, a lot of time outside as well, as my memory of primary school. Not really sure what we did outside, but I can just even remember sitting in circles around on the grass and stuff like that. So it would have been a very positive experience in my memory of it. And I know, some people would say the same, but other people have their views on that too. So.
Sure. Yeah. What about secondary school then? So
secondary school, I would have went to Coláiste Breda in Enniscorthy. I suppose in Rathnewer it was, and still is, quite mixed with where people go. So when we were in 6th class, there was a few people who went to Bunclody, quite a lot went to New Ross, and then some of us went to Enniscorthy. I think all of us really from Killaan at that stage would have went to Enniscorthy because the bus went from the village, whereas now there would be some from Killaan would go to New Ross. But back then I don't think there was. But it's funny, I was just talking about this with somebody recently whose child is at that stage of choosing where to go, and we were saying back then, even though we were best friends maybe with kids who went to New Ross, like my best friend from primary school went to school in New Ross, and we didn't have phones, but we still managed to maintain our friendship. I remember we used to write each other letters, and then at some stage we both got house phones, so we, at the weekend we were allowed to ring each other for like 5 minutes or something like that, so we didn't run up the phone bill. And then I suppose as we got older, again, records probably came into play, and the GA club, I suppose, that we were seeing each other in those places. So like a lot of the friendships were maintained, I think, even though we were travelling to different towns to secondary school.
Yeah. Just, I know you went into teaching subsequently yourself. What are the kind of other big changes that you noticed between your own school days and now, from when you're on the other side, so to speak? I suppose now as a teacher, I suppose I would think things are far more rigid in terms of curriculum base. Back then, in my memory of it, I'm sure the curriculum was followed, but that it was much more fluid, that the opportunities to go outside and engage in other things were much more open, and things weren't as strictly followed. And I suppose the other massive thing I would see is the changes in terms of technology. I suppose the school I'm working in Wexford Town at the moment is an iPad ready school, so I can, it's such a vast difference. And even differences like when I started teaching first in 2002, 2003, when I did my HDip, like I had the acetates on the overhead projector, and was even a blackboard in some of the classrooms I was in, not even a whiteboard, whereas now kids would laugh at the idea of that, because everything is obviously data projectors and PowerPoint and all the rest of it. Yeah. Would your family or your kind of wider community have had an interest in local history, kind of people and places?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say both of my grandparents and my father as well would have had a strong interest, and I suppose that's probably one of my biggest regrets, that I don't remember everything that, particularly my grandfather, as we went around in the car, and even my granny, as she got older, I'd have brought her, when I started driving, brought her on drives that was just one of her loves, was to go on a drive, and we might go just over towards Kilteely, back through Askinviller and back to Killaan, and she'd talk about who lived in the different houses, or we'd go up Ballybawn Lane or Carrageen or somewhere. And she'd have stories about, you know, how they came to be there, who married who, or whatever, all these little stories. And yeah, I don't remember a lot of it. And I just think it's such a pity that those stories weren't recorded, because they'd have been so interesting now, when I look at it now, whereas back then, I probably 20 years ago didn't have that appreciation.
Sure. Yeah. And that, I think that's probably usual enough. You're listening to these things in your early 20s, and you maybe think about them differently.
Now I'd love to remember what the stories were exactly, about the different places or the different families or whatever.
Are there any kind of traditions that used to be or are still practiced? Are there things kind of associated with kind of different times of the year? I know you mentioned Frohans earlier. Frohan Sunday is obviously something that has was that something that was kind of still going in your childhood, or
not that I remember?
Okay.
No.
Okay.
Now I have seen photos. I know it did. Mountain Sunday did happen, because I've seen photos of friends of mine, say, but I don't have any memory of being there. But possibly my father is a dairy farmer, so we always had to be back anywhere we went to milk cows, so that's possibly why we weren't there. I don't know, but I feel very strongly that it's really important now. So with the kind of reinvention, I suppose, of Mountain Sunday happening again, I feel it's really important to bring my girls to it, and I suppose probably as you get older, you realise, like, I know my two kids, I'm permanently probably telling them stuff about Killaan and trying to get them to have that interest in Killaan, in the mountain, and just that sense of place, that sense of knowing the importance of where they're from. I feel that's hugely important. And I suppose, but I don't really have any memories of doing anything on it in secondary school. I do remember in primary school we learned, say, a lot about, say, the place names, things like that, and just local history was quite important in Rathnure. Secondary school, I don't have the same memory of it, even though, like, geography would have been one of my favourite subjects. I have no real memory of doing anything local based on geography. And then I went on to UCD to do my degree in geography and sociology, and that's probably where then Killaan became very important to me again. I would have had Willie Nolan was one of my lecturers, and it was obviously all about local history and place names and stuff like that. And I would have done like a project or whatever it was, an assignment on the farm at home and stuff like that. And I can remember sitting down with him, and he, you know, his real interest in knowing about Killaan and knowing about your local area. And I think for me that probably maybe made me aware, kind of, God, this is a person in UCD that's actually interested in somewhere like Killaan. And now obviously the CUPHAT project, I suppose, has brought that to life again.
Yeah, because I mean it strikes me that, you know, the like the village is steeped in history, and you know you have 1798 connection, you have the hurling connection, you know, there's at all points kind of in the deep past and in much more recent times, you know, there's kind of touchstones and personalities, but if you grow up with that, maybe you kind of maybe assume every place has those kind of connections or historical associations, which isn't necessarily the case at all, of course.
Yeah, and I think you do actually. I think you kind of do forget that it's a special place, maybe from the historical perspective. And I suppose it's when you go away then and you meet people, they ask you where you're from, and straight away people say, oh, Kelly the boy from Killaan, or the records. And like, I think in most cases, whenever you say you're from Killaan, people connect with one of those two things. And yeah, I presume it's not the same for everywhere else. I suppose, yeah, you do forget sometimes maybe that you're very lucky to be from somewhere like this. And I suppose even then, in terms of, say, some of the stuff that came up with CUPHAT, or even just talking to other development groups here in the area in the last year or so, since I've kind of got involved in that kind of stuff, yeah, talking to them, they don't have the same historical stuff to go on that we do. You know, you kind of realise, oh God, yeah, we actually have an awful lot here in Killaan that yeah, everywhere else maybe, or not everywhere else has, yeah.
Yeah. How would you describe the community in the area?
I would say there's a great sense of community. I'd say it's definitely, like, we had our commemorative event there at the end of June.
This is for
1798, yeah. And in the lead up to that, myself and one of the other committee members, we went around to the houses, because I suppose we felt there was a group of us working on it, but we felt we were going to need a lot of help on that day, in terms of car parking and stuff like that, but also in terms of sandwiches and cakes and stuff like that. So we kind of said, look, we'll just go around to all the houses and ask, because obviously you can do so much with messages and phone calls and stuff, but it's not the same as calling to the houses. And I think we went around twice, and I think the first day we went around, we really realised that we were kind of like at houses, and people were just so delighted that we had called to their house. And you know, people were wanting to chat. They were really delighted something was happening in Killaan, and they were, you know, offering all sorts of things to us. And it was, I suppose, like the sense of community, and just, yeah, like we came back that day and we were absolutely delighted with the response we had got. And like, we just kept saying, Ger was driving, and we were getting out different houses, we just kept saying like this, and Ger just kept saying to me, you just have to ask, because it was really it was really uplifting to see how much people wanted to be involved. And I think the day then at the end of June really showed that, like, people came out and people were so delighted that there was something happening again. And I think that tied in, I suppose we'd had COVID, and that obviously had been very difficult for everybody, but also with records being closed, like, and it showed. And you know, people were asking us when we went around to the houses, is there any word on when it's opening? Will records be opened for it? And it really showed how important that was as a focal point in the village, because really the only thing that was in the village for the 11 years while records was closed was the chipper. So like at one stage in Killaan we had a shop. The shop is gone a long time, I'm not sure how many years, but that was where the chipper is as well. There was a shop beside that. There was also a post office over on the road towards Enniscorthy. So like there was nothing now for where people could meet. And I suppose as well in Killaan, I suppose as same in most areas, there's been a decline obviously in church going, but always in Killaan you had some of the community were going to the Church of Ireland Church here in Killaan, and some would have been going to church in Rathnure, to the Catholic Church. So that, you know, people didn't necessarily meet all their neighbours at the church, which might happen in other communities. So I think having a focal point like records, or having events on where people could meet each other, is hugely important.
Yeah. And it seemed like an enormous crowd turned out on that day as well. Yeah,
massive crowd. Yeah, very, very lucky with the weather, and yeah, it was great.
Can you say a little bit more about the development group and your involvement with them?
Yeah, so I suppose I wasn't always involved in the development group. The development group have been running here for a long time, I suppose, probably in an informal way. Back when I mentioned like my grandfather's involvement in things like the grotto and the monument, I know then I think it was probably Ger Houlihan and Tom Foley, I think, who would have been involved then after, say, the 1998 event. So there was a group there that did a huge amount of work in the local area. Excuse me. That was followed on then. Anne O'Connor from Radolph Lane would have been really heavily involved for the last number of years. And Callan has won like lots of awards in terms of tidy towns and Keep Wexford Beautiful. And Anne has been at the helm of all of that sort of stuff. There's a beautiful community garden there, just behind kind of the housing estate. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, but it's lovely. And during COVID, that was a real exciting place to go, I suppose, because there was nowhere else to go. So it was, I know for my own kids, that was like almost like a day out back then to walk up to the community garden. So yeah, the development group has done a lot of work. And I suppose in recent years, the footpaths and the lights and stuff like that in the village, and all along just the planting and stuff like that, keeping the graveyard well, and preparing then for the pattern every year. The pattern is the 26th of July, so next week. So that's always been a part of the development group. And then just in recent weeks, I suppose then we've got a larger committee going. I suppose really we built on the success of the commemorative event, and we had our AGM, and there's quite a large group of people now that have volunteered to be involved, which is absolutely brilliant.
That's great, because it's probably quite atypical. I know it's a constant struggle in communities to try and get that kind of voluntary help. That it's much harder to get off a committee than to get onto it. I think if you're we were pleasantly surprised at our AGM how many people were there and how many people gave their name at the end to just go onto the committee, and even the following week how many people turned up to the meetings. So it's great. It's just brilliant to see a bit of heart back in the place, and definitely records is what has done that. I suppose I just think in Callan we're absolutely blessed that the three men who bought records are the people who bought records, because if they hadn't have bought, I don't think say a random individual coming into the area would have been able to put the investment into it or seen the reason to put the investment into it. I think for the lads it was probably a labour of love to get it back to what it was, and it's, in my opinion, probably even better than what it was. And just there's that sense of wanting Callan to be Callan again and to have it heart. Yeah. Yeah, and there's obviously I guess the owners have sort of tapped into that and probably benefited from that local goodwill as well, that people want to kind of see it succeed. And I would. There's a huge amount of goodwill towards it. There really is, and the difference has made. I think already, it's only open a little over a month, I suppose now, but there's a huge difference just in, I suppose, talking to neighbours and talking to people, just even for the sense of. There was quite a few people maybe who'd have experienced probably a bit of isolation and loneliness, and just for them now to have somewhere to go, and so far so good. It's great, and I think there's a lovely atmosphere in it, that when you walk in, it doesn't matter who you are, it's a very friendly yet welcoming place. You touched on COVID there. What was the COVID experience like locally, or did it kind of, I mean, I know in some places or cases, maybe people became familiar with things in their locality that they didn't know existed. I don't know in a place like this whether that would have been the case. Would you have sort of already known every lane and every nook and cranny, or
probably not? No, probably definitely walks wise and going kind of up the mountain and that, up Knockatubber and stuff there, I wouldn't have been as familiar with it. And during COVID you just became, and actually it became almost a social event, because there was days you go walking and you could meet 4 or 5 other groups of people walking, because nobody had anything else to be doing. So it probably did kind of, in a sense, you nearly met more people during COVID when you were out walking and stuff than you did normally, because normally with just going to work and stuff like that, it was so much busier.
Yeah. Just to maybe change kind of topics for a second. and maybe talk a little bit about cultural heritage and natural heritage. What would your kind of understanding of those terms mean, or what sort of comes to mind if you hear the phrase cultural heritage or natural heritage?
I suppose cultural heritage, I suppose if you relate to Callan, I'd be very much thinking probably GA and the records. I suppose that would be my take on it. And I suppose the music then, I suppose that, you know, Kelly the Boy from Callan and Cuchullin's Son and those songs, I suppose that would be my straight away kind of thoughts on the cultural heritage of Callan would be those things. And then I suppose the natural heritage, very much thinking of the mountain really. And I suppose then the combining of the two would say, you know, the use of stone, say, for the monument and things like that, I suppose that, yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about that actually? That stone use, that's an interesting one.
I suppose it's just that there's been, that there's always, I suppose, been a sense of if something is going to be, you know, built in the area that's important, that it would be, you know, where possible, stone from the mountain that would be used for it. I suppose it's the same as kind of, you know, buying local or whatever. It's that idea, I suppose, really, that you're just using what you have within the area and sustainability.
Yeah, that it's sourced locally.
Yeah.
Okay. The just actually on that kind of on that natural heritage, is there have you a kind of favourite plant or tree or animal or anything, and are there sort of particular things that you like to see in the garden or in the village or up the mountain?
Not particularly. I wouldn't be a gardener, so I wouldn't be great on the plants or the trees really. No, the animals not massively into wildlife either. I suppose my grandmother's hatred of squirrels always stuck with me, that her shouting out the window at squirrels eating the bird nuts and stuff like that, and that always strikes me. I know my own kids, it's like, oh, isn't that squirrel so cute or something, and I'd be thinking, you don't know what your great granny used to call them. But yeah.
When you have visitors, what are the or if people are kind of travelling locally, where do you bring people, or what are the places that you kind of recommend to people?
I suppose, like, a lot of the time I'd just be more inclined to just go for a walk or something like that. In terms of, I suppose, what there is to do in the area, a lot of the time I suppose you do tend to gravitate towards the towns, and you know, say somewhere like the Heritage Park in Wexford, I suppose, is probably a biggest tourist attraction, Castle in Enniscorthy. So things like that, I suppose, are probably some of the Dunbrody Famine Ship in Ross as well, I suppose. But then, yeah, just kind of, I suppose the walks and stuff are probably the main things really that you would do around here. And you know, there's a lot of nice, I suppose not well known, you know, just our own way of going up kind of towards the mountain, kind of, not necessarily the paths that are there.
But you have a particular route or a particular
and just I know during COVID, like, my own kids would have called one of the roads there here just the top of the world, because you go up there and you could just see across everything, and you could see just, you know, different people's houses, and they love kind of pointing out, like, you know, your friend so and so lives over there or whatever. So that kind of stuff.
Those it strikes me on those trips that we would have made on up mountains. You can get an amazing vista on clear days, and can only imagine where it's rooted in a knowledge of whose
house is who.
Kind of level,
and it's great actually to go walking with other people. During COVID, we'd have a kind of a group of us that are friends would have done not a decent bit of walking, but kind of maybe once a week or whatever, we'd go up some of the different walks, and some of the group would be from over Kilteely way, so I wouldn't have known some of the walks over there. So like we would have done the Turf Cutters Lodge, and we'd have done up Shannon's Lane. So with those different ones, and just even it's really interesting just other people's knowledge then of, you know, that's whatever over there when you get to the top and you're being kind of given a guided tour from a height.
Actually, can you kind of describe what the view is like from some of the kind of higher points, or what have you sort of particular favorite views or vistas? Not really, I suppose. You know, apparently on clear days you can see as far as Wales. I don't know if my eyes have seen that, but apparently you can. Yeah, I just think it's fascinating to be up, you know, and to be able to see kind of just, and to have that look down. Do you spend much time kind of walking in the uplands, or where do you go?
I suppose, yeah, if I had more time I would. During COVID we would have done a lot more walking, but I suppose, yeah, with kids and activities and stuff, a lot of my walks are confined to kind of a few kilometres from here over the road and back kind of as fast as I can, or in Rathnure now, around the GA pitch we've a walking track. And that's just a recent development as well, which has been fantastic. And I suppose the big advantage of that is that it's very sociable. So you don't maybe have the views that you have when you go up the mountain, but from a social perspective, it's great when the kids are training or whatever. You know, you can have the chats. Yeah.
What are the most kind of interesting features of the kind of local landscape, however you define local?
I don't know. I suppose one of my favourite views, I suppose, or two of my favourite views are just as I come over this road from the crossing Killan, as you come over Raduff, and just as you come towards the church, and you got the trees like a canopy, and I just think that's just like a magical place to kind of drive through. I just think there's something very enchanting kind of about that. And then I suppose as you come further up this road and you're just looking at the mountain, particularly when the heather is in bloom and you're just looking at a beautiful kind of purple mountain in front of you, I think, you know, they're probably two of the things about the landscape that stick out in my head. Yeah.
Has the landscape changed over your lifetime, or is there anything that comes to mind in terms of things that are different now to where, or how they were maybe when you were younger?
Not particularly. No, nothing that stands out. No.
Yeah. We've touched a little bit on change and things that are different now compared to kind of how they were. What are maybe the some of the things that caused those changes, or what was behind them? Thinking in terms of things like technology or transport or any of those kinds of things.
Yeah, I suppose technology, yeah, has caused, you know, has made huge changes. Like that's probably the biggest change everywhere, I suppose. In terms of transport, really around Killan, I don't think a lot has changed. I suppose back when I was growing up, maybe not everybody had a car, but a lot of people probably did, really. And I suppose maybe not everyone had a second car, which is probably the case now. But like really, I think in terms of bus transport and public transport and stuff, I don't think we've moved on a whole lot in 40 years. You know, the school bus is still there. I know there's talk of a local bus service being developed, I think, at the moment, that's out for tender, I think the area manager had said recently. So, you know, maybe that's going to bring about great change, but really for anybody in this area in terms of transport. I think things are probably pretty much the same as they were. Like, you're very, very car dependent.
Just actually, thinking around, say things like employment. Are people doing different jobs now to what they were, or are they working in different places to where they were? Has those things changed?
Yeah, I would say, definitely. Employment wise, I suppose there's a lot of people maybe that would have been involved in farming that are maybe working off the farm as well, kind of combining the two. So there's probably a good bit more travel there, and even in terms of people travelling, to Dublin and stuff, like, there'll be a good few people around here who are working in Dublin, maybe not every day, but a few days a week. My own husband does. So it's, I suppose the commuting has become almost just a normal part of life, and I suppose COVID maybe brought that back a bit more, as in some people then were working from home more and stuff like that. And I suppose as well, like, thinking back, my aunt worked in the revenue office in Wexford, and I remember growing up thinking, God, she works so far away from home, like, and my grandparents, she had such a job, but to go to work every day, like, her journey seemed like, when we were kids, like, she worked really, really far away, because my other aunt worked in the school in Rathnewer, so that was very local. And now, obviously, I've worked in Wexford for a long, long time, and, like, to me, it's only a few minutes down the road, really. But back then it seemed like it was a really long distance away, and, like, there's obviously lots of people around here working, in places like that. Yeah.
Because I'm wondering, we touched on the sort of lack of public transport links, and that would there have been a period where, people who were working, say further afield, just would have just moved rather than commuted? Is that something that's different now, or? Yeah,
probably is something that would have changed. Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine when I was growing up, I don't remember anybody working in Dublin and living in Callan. I know, like, my mother and my aunt would have worked in Dublin at various stages, and obviously would have lived in Dublin. So yeah, I'd imagine that has changed. All right, yeah.
Just in mention of Dublin, if I met you in Dublin, or you met someone on the street in Dublin, how would you describe the place where you're from?
I'd probably say it's out in the middle of nowhere. I suppose I'd always start by saying I'm from Callan. Do you know Callan? And usually you get the records, or Kelly the boy from Callan. If not, I'd tell them that bit. And then usually you get some sort of hurling thing or something like that. Or somebody would talk about when they were in school. I remember learning that song in school by Kelly the boy from Callan. So yeah, and I suppose I would very much say it is in the middle of nowhere. It is on the side of the mountain. Like, even I would tell my students in school where I work in Wexford Town, obviously secondary school, they have a curiosity about where you're from, and some of them would be saying to you, "But Miss, where are you from?" And I'd tell them where I was from, like, and some of them would be familiar with Rathnewer anyway from playing camogie and stuff like that, and been up at matches, and they'd be like, "Oh, Miss, that's on the side of the mountain," like, and I was there one day and it was so windy and it was so cold and it was so wet and whatever. But it's funny, even, they're not living that far away from here, but they wouldn't have a huge amount of knowledge about up here, and to them in Wexford Town, like, this is miles away, like, it really is on the side of the mountain.
It's interesting how it's almost the flip side of what you described with your aunt's commute when you were younger.
Yeah.
This is another world. Or
yeah.
But in that sense, the way you'd kind of describe where you're from, the specific mention of Callan, by the sound of things, it wouldn't necessarily be any different if you were in Dublin or Rosslare or Wexford Town. Callan is kind of the starting point, and you have those kind of associations to kick things off.
Yeah.
How just to maybe bring the conversation onto onto tourism. If you had to pick one thing in the area or in the uplands to show a friend who was visiting, what would it be?
I would probably bring them up to the meeting point in the Blackstairs and kind of go up to the top the hill there. From there would probably be, I suppose I'd be thinking that's the shortest, most logical walk to do, to show them kind of in a short space of time the beauty of the area. That would probably be where I'd go, because even the drive up to there is very, very nice, and that would probably be what I'd choose, I think. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit more about the meeting point.
I suppose it's just it's a landmark as such. It's where it's a place that people know, and that I suppose from there then you can go in lots of different directions. So yeah, that's it. And it probably is one of the, I suppose the beauty of it is that it's very undeveloped, and that you're not going to go up there and find like 100 cars. You know, you might see another 2 or 3 cars, and that might be it, and your chances of bumping into somebody are fairly slim. You know, so a few sheep is probably all you're going to see on your travels, and I suppose that is some of the beauty of it. Yeah.
That kind of leads me on nicely, actually, to maybe getting a sense in terms of the possibility of increased tourism, both maybe the challenges and the potential benefits. How do you feel about the prospect or possibility of more tourism in the Blackstairs?
I think it'd be hugely positive. Now I know I've just said that about kind of the quietness and so on, but I think the mountain is so vast that there's enough space up there for everybody. And I just think the benefits of tourism for the area in terms of employment will be massive, and just in terms of the local economy, the opportunities that it might give to, like, say, craft producers and things like that, and just that sense of life that would give to the place. Like, I do think in the future, you know, down the line in records, if you had, you know, a cafe or whatever, and you have somewhere like that right on your doorstep that's able to function because it has enough business, the benefits for that, for us as locals of that, would be huge, alongside then the revenue and the jobs and all the rest of it. Yeah.
What are the biggest challenges that the area would face in terms of tourism?
I suppose the infrastructure, you know, a lot of the roads, I suppose, leading up to some of the areas I've described are not going to accommodate a 50-seater bus. You know, so there's a lot of, I suppose, issues around infrastructure and so on. Even something that came up just in some of the discussions we've been having, like, is the lack of a public toilet. You know, so if you're going, you know, if somebody is going to the mountain for the day, if say they're going to go up to the meeting point, you know, the lack of anywhere local even to buy a sandwich or a cup of tea. You know, really you have to go to Ballywilliam or Kilteely. I know there's a small shop in Rathmuir village, but really it's more so, you know, sweets and things like that. So yeah, to get even a cup of tea and sandwich is not really possible locally at the moment. So I suppose there's some of the challenges, alongside then the transport infrastructure, like, and then issues like, say, even just for people to know where to go. So around signage, you know, say websites that show you your marked ways to go, stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, what would you, how would you describe the ideal visitor to the area, or what kind of tourists would you like to see?
I think Killaan especially, and the surrounding areas, but I think Killaan village has the potential to appeal to tourists in all categories, really. Like, I think obviously, with the mountain, that you're looking at your active kind of tourists, your tourist that wants kind of maybe the experience of the hike or whatever. But also I think, there's a lot of tourism potential there for, say, groups maybe of more senior people who have an interest in history, and that kind of experience. There's also, I suppose, the religious aspect to it, with St. Anne's Well in particular. That's a really, I suppose, hidden gem in a lot of ways, as well. And then I think there's huge potential with, say, like just the heritage, the biodiversity, everything combined to attract kind of families, and maybe some of the shorter walks combined with, little bit of history, little bit of nature, and then maybe something to eat or whatever at the end of the day. Like somebody, say, going out on a Sunday afternoon with kids, they really only need to be entertained maybe for a few hours. So it's, kind of a short walk, learn something about the area, have something to eat and head home. So you've kind of got your mixture of different tourists, and I suppose with probably potentially your families as well, but particularly maybe your people who are into kind of the walking and stuff like that, you're looking at trying to maybe entice people to stay overnight eventually if accommodation can be developed. And I know there's potential plans for motorhome parking and stuff like that in the area, so that would hugely benefit if the people are staying around for a few days. Then they're going to spend more money locally, they're going to see more of the area, and that's, you would hope, going to benefit everybody. And then that's going to, I suppose, snowball as well, that they'll tell other people about this area and that there's lots to do and so on.
Yeah, it strikes me that a lot of those kinds of activities as well, there's kind of multiple opportunities to interact with local people as well, and I suppose the kind of benefit from that local knowledge that long-term residents would have around the area. Yeah, there is, I suppose, and I suppose the pub being locally owned and a large number of locals, I suppose, frequenting it as well probably adds to that it's a real local experience. It's not a tourist pub. At some places I know you can go to that can be quite touristy, but it's very much local, and I suppose that would be the beauty of it maybe for tourists, that they're very much just coming into something that's a very natural thing in the area, that it's not put on for them. Is it a place that would have had tourists or visitors or people returning from England to see family, or what, in terms of kind of outside visitors, historically speaking, what would there have been much of that in Killearn? Or
massive amount of people coming back from England. That would have been a common feature kind of growing up. We'd have had relatives ourselves. My grandfather's brother would have been in the UK, that would have been a thing every summer. And I even remember my grandfather's brother and his wife and his daughter coming home in the summer, and they would be tying in almost with other people from the UK that were coming at the same time, and they had a relative who used to come in a caravan, I think it was, and stay over there at the Pattern Green beside the graveyard. So a lot of the UK visitors even came sometimes to tie in with the pattern in Killearn as well. Would have been an important date kind of, I suppose, for people. So there was always quite a lot of returning visitors, I suppose. Otherwise, I suppose records would have brought massive numbers into the area. Probably not long stay, probably a few hours. So buses would have come to the nightclub there from all over the county, and that's one of the things, I suppose, when I'd say I'm from Killearn, sometimes people would say, I remember going on buses to the nightclub up there, or to learn line dancing would have been a big thing and stuff like that. So there would have been a lot of people coming into the area for that reason, and I suppose then historically, I think that sense of history and connection would probably have been stronger with the older generation. So I think, you know, people would have come back, say, to see the graveyard, things like that, to see ancestors' graves, that kind of thing. Whereas I suppose now, you know, times have changed a little bit, and maybe that isn't as strong as it used to be in terms of drawing people in to the area.
Yeah, I know though there's still kind of stuff marked in terms of the graveyard and kind of what's what, if people are if that is something that people are
there is a map down there. That's something I suppose in the development group we hope to develop further, that we've seen examples done in other graveyards in Wicklow in particular, where where all the graves are marked out and named and everything, so that's preserved there. But Glory Binghams has done a huge amount of work on all of that work in the graveyard.
You mentioned kind of biodiversity and nature there in terms of kind of some of the stuff that would be available for people to do if they were visiting. Can you say a little bit more about that and the nature of the area?
I suppose Anne O'Connor and Joanna, who were involved in the development group, did a huge amount of work on biodiversity, particularly I suppose it would have been maybe pre-COVID and start of COVID, and just even I know Joanna would have reported a lot of stuff to the National Biodiversity Centre around lizard sightings and things like that. So there's quite a lot of things that are quite unique, I think, in the area. Okay. So it would be lovely to develop that more and to be able to even teach the next generation a little bit more about that.
Yeah. And we've touched on history a couple of times there, in terms of archaeology or kind of local sites or things that are sort of interest in the archaeology field. Is what kind of comes to mind there?
I suppose that one of the main things that comes to mind for me, which was only a recent discovery for me, was this old ecclesiastical settlement where the graveyard is, and out around that. And I suppose, like, I obviously have lived in Killaan my whole life. I wasn't aware of that until really the CUPHAT project came along, and people started to talk about these kinds of things. And I think that's been one of the huge benefits of it, that it's brought around conversation. And like, you know, one of my neighbours here, he was in my class in school, and he knew about this because I suppose it's on his father's land, and connected in, and, you know, just to know that's there, you know, adds a huge amount more to the graveyard and the church and so on, just to know that there was settlement here from a long time ago, and, you know, that was a very important site back then.
Yeah. And the having touched on biodiversity and archaeology, the one of the other themes is around geology and rock types and kind of soil types. I'm not sure if there's anything that particularly comes to mind for you on the geology end of things.
I suppose because of the fact that I would have studied geography and I'm a geography teacher, I would always use the Blackstairs as a good example, like when I'm teaching rocks in school, and I suppose it's helpful for me that this is where I'm from, and that, you know, I can bring in my little rock samples and stuff like that and show them the different rock types, that kind of thing. But I suppose other than that, you know, I suppose.
No, that's interesting though, and again, it's something that maybe, you know, you know, it's not something that's available to everyone that you can that I suppose on your doorstep as well.
Yeah, I suppose it's something very much maybe that I take for granted, kind of. And I know even I was up in Springmount with one of my own daughters just for a little walk last week, and just we were looking at just the different rock types, and I suppose she's going into third class now, but just kind of to give, I suppose, kids an awareness of the different rock types, and just showing her, kind of explaining kind of like why there's crystals in the granite or whatever. So stuff like that I think is important. And I suppose the sooner they learn things like that and the more awareness they have of it, the easier it'll come to them when they're, if they're studying geography for junior cycle, leaving cert, whatever.
To broaden things out to a much kind of wider level, what's the best thing about living here?
I suppose the beauty of the area, really. Yeah, I think that's probably, it's the beauty in terms of the visual aspect, and then in terms of the sensory aspect of it. Even just, I think sometimes just the smell of the air, and the gorse and stuff like that. Different times of the year, I suppose the different smells. I think there's an awful lot to be said for just the fresh air in the area, and I suppose even just the silence and the solitude, the sound of the wind, stuff like that, and then just the beauty of the area. Yeah.
And what's the thing you'd most like to change?
I suppose I'd like there to be more services in Killaan for people. So, like, even if that is just like a coffee shop or somewhere that you can buy a loaf of bread and a carton of milk, or buy the paper or whatever it might be. It's just, I suppose, to have that for people in the community, because I think that would really give it a sense of community. That, if you're going to the shop to buy your carton of milk or whatever, you're going to bump into somebody. If there's a coffee shop or whatever, I think, that's the kind of stuff that will lead to a sense of community. And that probably is something that would be nice to change. But again, it's probably not economically viable in a small place like this is probably the main issue with it. In terms of anything else to change, I suppose I don't know if I'd change a whole lot. It's more just to continue and try to maintain a sense of community in the area, because I suppose, like, the population is probably an aging population. We're living in times where I suppose a lot of the younger people will move away, and I suppose you want them to eventually move back and maybe have their own families here and stuff like that.
In terms of your own generation, how did that kind of play out? Are there many of your peers kind of still based locally, or did a lot of them kind of not return after they went away after school? Or
there's a lot of us still around, actually. There's obviously not as many as there were, but there's still quite a lot of people of kind of my age group. But I suppose maybe some have just moved back, kind of, and have their kids in school and Ratnure and stuff like that.
Because it strikes me, we talked a little bit about the absence, maybe during the closure of records, of a kind of a natural hub, and that, in terms of sort of creating a sense of community and having people sort of come together in large numbers. What kind of have you kind of discussed sort of medium or long term plans or prospects in terms of the kind of community development? Have you thoughts and plans that you're looking at? Or
I suppose we've lots of ideas. Maybe some are a little bit aspirational. I suppose we would love to. There's a plot of land in the housing estate that's kind of not in use. I suppose we would ideally love to maybe eventually have that for community use. That you might have a park, or even maybe we've had talks of maybe like a men's shed or something like that, or a community shed. We've seen what they've done maybe in Courtnacuddy, where they have something like that now. So something like that. One of the big things, I suppose, for us would be to maybe try to do something in terms of the hall here in Killaan. So that was the old school, the old Church of Ireland school. It's not used very frequently at the moment, which is unfortunate. And I suppose it obviously needs a little bit of work in terms of, it's quite an old building. But I suppose we'd see that there's huge potential for that there. I know somebody was just telling me recently that when they were, somebody in kind of my age group, but when they were younger, there was like table tennis club there. So things like that, kind of to have things, I suppose, outside of the pub, because I know I'm conscious I've mentioned the pub as being crucial to the village in a lot of ways, which it is, but I also think there's a section of the community who maybe aren't pub goers.
Sure.
And I think it's really important that there's something there for everybody. So to redevelop the hall, in that there's more going on in it. And even we talked, even if it's just say a speaker to come once a month on like various, it could be like somebody to talk about gardening one month, it could be somebody to do beauty therapy the next month, but just that it's a way of bringing the community together. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a really formal kind of a situation, but that it's a sense of just bringing people together, maybe different people different months, because people will have different interests, maybe a baking demonstration close to Christmas or whatever. So things like that, and to just have it that there's stuff going on, so that people are meeting people, and that there's a sense of belonging, because I think that's really important. And I think there's a huge sense of kind of, I suppose, gratitude or well-being for people from being involved in the community. And I think there's a lot of studies out there that show that now. And I suppose, well-being is becoming more mainstream, I suppose, let's say, and people are far more aware of it now. And like a lot of the different psychologists and so on that are writing, a lot of the books and things like that are saying that, being a part of a community, having that sense of belonging is so important in terms of people's mental health. And I suppose that's something that we'd like to try to work on in Killaan, that we're kind of trying to provide something for people and trying to get everybody involved, regardless of kind of their age, their ability, denomination, anything like that, that it's very inclusive.
Because it sounds from what you said about the 1798 commemoration and your kind of house to house tour, like there's a lot of there's a lot of good feeling that could be tapped into if you can sort of provide the event or the thing for people to go to or attend.
Yeah, that's what we feel like. There's a huge amount of goodwill there. The amount of sandwiches and buns and things that we got for that day was just phenomenal. But so there is a massive amount of goodwill there, and a lot of people wanting to be involved. And I think it is yet to tap into that now. I suppose, like there's County Council and Healthy Wexford are running Meet Your Neighbour events. We've applied to run one of those events in the autumn time. We are meeting with Wexford Local Development to try to speak to them about putting together kind of like a village health check or development plan for the area, so that we kind of have a long-term vision maybe for the next 5 years, because there's a lot of ideas there now. There's a lot of enthusiasm, and we want to try to build on that. And I think like one of the most important things is that we don't become kind of like a niche group, that we have kind of, I suppose, subcommittees kind of, or subgroups working on different things, that we're not just about tidy towns, which there's been fantastic work done on that, and there are lots of people interested in that, but also that there's other areas that other people can become involved, that people don't feel, I can't be involved in that because I'm no good at gardening and I don't know a weed from a flower or whatever, that you've everybody feeling, okay, yeah, I could help with that bit, or that I can help make the tea, or as one woman said, I won't do the tea, but I'll stand at the sink and I'll wash up for you, as long as no one sees me in the kitchen, I'm happy standing at the sink, and that everyone finds their place within it. Yeah.
What have you kind of learned or taken away from your own sort of involvement with the with the development group?
I suppose that it's that we're living in like a really, I suppose, dynamic and a really enthusiastic area. That there's a huge spirit of volunteerism in the area, which I don't think might be evident in other areas. So I think we're really, really lucky with that. I think there's a huge sense of pride in being from Killaan. I know I would feel that myself, and I just think from other people there is, that there is a real sense of pride in Killaan, and I think there's a real sense of getting Killaan back to what it was. That it was a really vibrant place, that there was a great sense of life in Killaan, and that it really had a heart, and I think that's what everyone seems to want it to be back to.
Is there anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to mention or talk about, Anna?
I don't think so. No, I suppose my voice in Killaan development sometimes is very much as well probably trying to encourage young people to be involved, or just the importance of kids being involved. I know, the pattern, as I said, is next week, and I always remember going to the pattern in Killaan, and my family didn't have any direct descendants as such buried there, but we still always went because it was in Killaan, and I think that's really, really important, because I think if, say, I didn't bring my kids to it, in 20 years or in 40 years, who's going to be there running the pattern? So you need them. And I suppose I was suggesting this year, that the kids would do the readings, because they'll remember that. They'll remember I was 8 or I was 10 and I stood up there and I read in front of everybody. And I think that kind of stuff is really, really important, just in terms of keeping a place alive. And naturally we'll have drop off that they'll be teenagers and they'll be in their 20s and they won't be around, they'll be gone travelling, or they'll be in secondary school and they'll be too cool to be standing up there. But I think they'll eventually come back to it, and I think that's what's really important, that we're kind of bringing on the next generation all the time and thinking about kind of the future, and we have to look after the area to pass it on to them.
Just tell me a little bit about the pattern, actually. What actually happens?
So the pattern takes place on the 26th of July every year, and that's the feast of Saint Anne and Saint Joachim. And Saint Anne obviously is our saint here, so the pattern takes place where, kind of just beside the site of where there was a former church, so it's just on that like almost altar space there in the graveyard. People stand around and sit on some of the more tombstone kind of graves. Usually there's a good crowd there. Usually a lot of the same people attend every year. And then there's a procession led by the priest down to the Blessed Well, down to St. Anne's Well afterwards. A lot of people in the lead up to the pattern would do like a pilgrimage or novena to the well, where they go, not sure how many times, I should know that bit of religious information, but they go so many times leading up to the pattern. So like my mother, my aunts would do that. So there would be procession then down to the well, and then this year, and in some previous years as well, there has been tea and stuff back in the hall here in Killaan as well then afterwards. So it's just again a sense of bringing the community together, getting everybody, getting people just out to chat, and that, as well as I suppose celebrating a little bit of our culture and our heritage.
No, sure. And I suppose in that kind of post-COVID era as well, maybe people are more conscious around these kind of local opportunities to connect and kind of have those things that
I think actually myself probably even, I think COVID did give us that chance to reflect maybe, and to realise how lucky we were, and we were living somewhere that we could get out and we could enjoy it in as much as you could enjoy COVID. But really we probably did have a far better experience of it than, you know, people maybe living in, you know, in cities and things like that who were much more confined. So I suppose it does give you that sense of appreciation of where you're from.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Anna, thanks a million.
Thank you, Daniel.